Okay, it's been 2 weeks since I've started trying to use this Ozito robot mower. After my last video, you may have the impression that the mower is useless. As you can see in this clip, the mower is working well enough. To be fair to the robot, the yard I'm trying to use it in is quite challenging, with many difficulties, such as the slope, the high percentage of lawn that is weeds, how sparse the lawn is, the amount of debris such as leaves, grass clippings and small twigs between the green bits being classified as not lawn, the same debris being loose on top of the ground making it slippery, and many of the weeds are thicker stemmed than grass, which makes it harder for the chassis to brush past, particularly when it's trying to turn uphill. Some of these problems were caused before I started with the robot mower by my reluctance to mow often enough, which resulted in cutting too much at once, mowing shorter so it looked okay for longer before I had to mow again, using the mulcher plug in the mower when cutting too much, which also left eucalyptus leaves in the lawn, not replacing or sharpening the mower blades often enough, and that all led to cutting too much off the lawn at once, and the mulching mower couldn't mulch it enough. This all leads to sparse grass, weeds, and grass clippings that haven't been sufficiently mulched laying on the ground. Also, it had me used to seeing the lawn mowed too short for the plants I have, which results in a browner, thinner lawn. Simply increasing the cut height of the robot mower to 60mm has resulted in there being more green in the lawn, and the leaves covering a larger percentage of the ground. This has made the robot mower more frequently detect the ground ahead as lawn to mow and drive on, even in bright sunlight. Another change that has helped is to mow in the morning, as the shadows fall in a direction that tends to move the mower away from trouble spots. Those trouble spots also need attention. So, in order to have the mower continue properly, try and have a flat area at the bottom of a hill, if there is a boundary there, to make it easier for it to turn away from the boundary. This helps reduce the wear and tear on the lawn in that area, which keeps the boundary area greener. If you have a slope near a boundary, watch how it behaves there, and if it's sliding too much, either level it out or keep the mower out of that area. If you don't, the mower will destroy the lawn in that spot and power off there too. Clumping grass or other bumps should not be near a boundary, particularly if the boundary is in a downhill area. The mower tends to high center itself, and as it troubleshoots getting itself off that clump, it tends to slide down the hill. If it runs into a boundary while doing this, it never escapes and powers off in that spot. You'll also need to fill in any holes in the lawn. You see there, I've got a couple of patches filled in. As you can see in this area, it took me a while to learn some of these lessons, and it's worn out parts of the lawn. So that's why that area is quite thin. Okay, and now for some clips of me learning some of these errors that I was making. Starting with it out the front where it's actually greener, and learning that cutting a taller grass is easier for it to navigate. Some notes about this particular area out the front is that next to the wall there, it's quite brown. The wall's only just been put in and the grass has been severely disturbed. At the bottom of the hill is the magnetic strip, and about now it's running into a petrol spot where it's killed the grass. It's very brown. And also over near the wall there's a bit of a trench that it falls into sometimes. It does manage to get itself out, which is really quite nice. Though it does mean that the mower can't pass in some directions due to the chassis being too low. And the height of the chassis is not linked to the cut height either. You'll see it now go in and out of the ditch that runs up and down the the lawn right where it's going through now, and it managing to drive in and out of that ditch fairly successfully. I haven't needed to help it out in and out of that ditch very much at all. Most of the reason for that is that it has an escape path down the hill, and that when it gets to the bottom of the hill it's able to turn. Next up is me learning that it gets stuck on clumps of grass when it's next to the boundary. First up is where I found it after going away for a few days after week 1, and this is me actually watching it actually do it. Now you see it start to slowly try and turn off the clump of grass. It slowly does, and then it goes forward a little bit, figures out it can't, and tries to go backwards, and realises it's reversing over the magnetic strip, which means it's having an error. And here is the error on the screen. Then I try and replicate the same benefit of the longer grass out the back. Despite it being a bit sparse and much more full of weeds, I've let it grow a bit before this mow. This is also the first time I've started at mowing at such an early time in the morning. One of the reasons for that is that you actually have to push the buttons on the mower at the particular time of morning that you want it to start. And so starting at 6:30 means you need to get up at 6:30 and push the buttons on the mower at that time. As you can see here, it's making its way up and down the hill fairly successfully, despite there being some quite long grass clumps and some sparse areas here. Motoring down the hill to the edge there, to a bare patch, all the way to the bottom. It mows around in this area for a while, and then I see it go over this lump in the yard here, and see it raise one of its wheels up off the ground, and it tries to turn away from that time, because when it raises one of its wheels in the air, it thinks it's about to tip over, I believe, and as a precautionary measure it backs away and goes in a different direction. Later on I block off that particular area as I try and level it out so that it doesn't have that problem in the future. It's part of the troubleshooting steps with this, is that you need to identify all of the spots in the yard that it has problems. Then a bit later in the day, I see how that longer cut is going out the back where it's fairly sparse, and while it's not perfect, it does manage to make its way around the yard. This particular day the sun comes in and out behind some clouds, which can potentially lead to issues if the yard is too short, that when the sun goes away it can drive somewhere thinking everything is fine, and then when the sun comes out it can all of a sudden decide, oh no, I'm trapped, I have nowhere to go. But with the longer lawn, this is less of a problem, in that even when the sun is out it's able to detect what's in front of it as lawn, except for that bare patch. But you can see it drives from the sun to the shade in that spot, and then sees the wall and does appropriate actions. You can also see at the corner of the house where I've blocked off with some 90mm drain pipe an area that I don't want it to go because it's simply too steep, and having the boundary directly against the house, it's unable to make its way up that hill. It just slides. Even here it slides a little bit, but because it's able to get some sort of traction, it's able to make its way out of that spot. Here you can see that it has trouble in the sun detecting what's ahead as lawn to mow until the sun goes behind a cloud, and then all of a sudden it detects that as, oh, this is fine. The issue with it getting caught in bright sunlight in an area that it can't detect as lawn to drive could be mitigated by the software developers, in that it could decide to go into a troubleshooting mode to try and get itself out of a stuck condition, and when it does that it will turn off the mower blades, and then it should, and this is what the developers should change, it should not have such stringent requirements on what is lawn, and then it can drive its way out of the particular problem area back to a thicker, greener pastures where it can start mowing again. If the sun does go away and it does detect it as lawn to mow again, by all means start mowing again. But the developers really need to work on that, because it can trap itself if your yard is not pristinely green everywhere, such as my yard, where many areas are off limits because it's just too thin, too sparse, and too brown. It shouldn't drive in there at all, and if it does, it should be able to drive its way out. For those people wanting to see what the mower does when it's trying to go home, which is what it's doing here, when there's an obstacle between it and the charging station, this is a clip for you. You can see that there's a fairly large brown patch that it's detecting as a no-go zone just to the right there, and then further off to the right is the charging station. And so the path it needs to take is up the hill, off to the right through the greener area there, and then down the hill again. This is what I mean when I say that a robot doesn't necessarily have to be smart, as long as it's smart enough. This particular search pattern, while not particularly clever, it does seem to be effective. That despite it taking a while, it does eventually get to the charging station. Spends a bit of the time at the bottom of the hill here doing its running into obstacle troubleshooting move, where it turns a bit, looks a bit, turns a bit, looks a bit. You can see the home light there on the charging station, so the boundary, the guide wire is connected properly. Doing that circle again, and that left and right nose waggle that it does it's part of its method of finding home. I'm not sure exactly what it's doing when it's doing that, but it only does that when it's looking for the charging station. And coming up just here, it's very close to the actual guide wire, probably about 30 centimeters away, but it didn't find it that time, and it's doing some more troubleshooting. This time it goes a little further up the hill, and it finds the guide wire and goes back to the charging station and plugs itself in successfully.